The Round River Drive by Douglas Malloch, 1877 to 1938. 'Twas 64 or 65 we drove the great Round River Drive. 'Twas 65 or 64, yes, it was during of the war, or was it after or before? Those were the days in Michigan, the good old days when any man could cut and skid and log and haul, and there was pine enough for all. Then all the logger had to do was find some timber that was new, besides a stream he knew it ran to Huron or to Michigan. That at the mouth a mill there was, to take the timber for the saws. In those old days the pioneer, he need not read his title clear, to mansions there or timber here. Paul Bunyan, have you heard of Paul? He was the kingpin of them all, the greatest logger in the land. He had a punch in either hand, and licked more men and drove more miles, and got more drunk in more new styles than any other PV prince before or then or ever since. Paul Bunyan bossed that famous crew, a bunch of shouting bruisers too. Black Dan, MacDonald, Tom McCann, Dutch Jake, Red Murphy, Dirty Dan, and other Dans from black to red, with Curly Charlie, Yellowhead, and Patsy Ward from Off the Clam, the kind of gang to break a jam, to clean a bar or wrestle rum, or give a 20 to a bum. Paul Bunyan and his fighting crew in 64 or 5 or 2, they started out to find the pines without much thought of section lines. So west by north they made their way 100 miles until one day they found good timber, level land, and roaring waters close at hand. They built a bunk and cookhouse there. They didn't know exactly where it was, and more, they didn't care. Before the spring I gave my word, some mighty funny things occurred. Now near the camp there was a spring that used to steam like everything. One day a chap that brought supplies had on a load of mammoth size, a load of peas. Just on the road, beside the spring, he ditched his load, and all those peas, the bloomin' mess, fell in the spring, a ton I guess. He come to camp expecting he would get from Bunyan the GB, but Joe the cook, a French Canuck, said, "Paul, I think it is the luck. Them spring is hot, so Paul, pardon, and we will have the grand bouillon." To prove the teamster not at fault, he took some pepper, pork, and salt, a right proportion each of these, and threw them in among the peas, and got enough and good soup too, to last the whole of winter through. The rest of us were kind of glad he split the peas when soup we had, except the flunkies. They were mad because each day they had to tramp 3 miles and tote the soup to camp. Joe had a stove, some furnace too, the size for such a hungry crew. Say what you will, it is the meat the pie and sinkers choppers eat that get results. It is the beans and spuds that are the best machines for falling Norway, skidding pine, and keeping hemlock drives in line. This stove of Joe's, it was a rig for cooking grub that was so big, it took a solid cord of wood to get a fire going good. The funkies cleaned 3 40s bare each week to keep a fire in there. That stove's dimensions north and to south, from east to westward and so forth, I don't remember just exact, and do not like to state a fact, unless I know that fact is true, for I would hate deceiving you. Put in a mammoth batch of dough, and then he thought, at least he tried, to take it out the other side. But when he went to walk around the stove, it was so far, he found, that long before the bend he turned, the bread not only baked but burned. We had 2 hands for flunkies, Sam and Tom. Joe used to strap a ham on each foot of them when we had pancakes each a.m. They'd skate around the stove lids for an hour or so, or maybe more, and grease 'em for him. But one day old Pink-Eye Martin, anyway he couldn't see so very good, old Pink-Eye, he misunderstood which was the baking powder can, and in the dough 8 fingers ran of powder blasting, powder black. These flunkies never did come back. They touched a cake, a flash, and poof went Sam and Tommy through the roof. We hunted for a month or so, but never found 'em. That you'll know, it was the year of the blue snow. We put 100 million feet of skids that winter, hard to beat. You say it was some crew. We took it off 142. 100 million feet we skid. That 40 was a pyramid. It runs up skyward to a peak. To see the top would take a week. The top of it seems to me, was far as 20 men could see. But down below the stuff we slides, for there was trees on all 4 sides. And by the way, a funny thing occurred along in early spring. One day we seen some deer tracks there, as big as any of a bear. Old 40 Jones, he's straw boss on the side where those deer had gone. He doesn't say a thing, but he thinks out a scheme, and him and me, we set a key log in a pile, and watched that night for quite a while. And when the deer come down to drink, we tripped the key log in a wink. We killed 200 in the herd, for 40's scheme was sure a bird. Enough of venison we got to last all winter with 1 shot. Poor Bunyan had the biggest steer that ever was in camp that year. 9 horses he'd out pull and skid. He weighed 5,000 pounds, he did. The barn boss handy man beside made him a harness from the hides of all the deer. It took 'em all, and Pink-Eyed Martin used to haul his stove wood in. Remember yet how buckskin stretches when it's wet. One day when he was hauling wood, a dead log that was dry and good, one cloudy day it started in to raining like the very sin. Well, Pink-Eye pounded on the ox and beat it over roads and rocks to camp. He landed there all right and turned around, no log in sight. But down the road, around the bend, those tugs were stretching without end. Well, Pink-Eye, he goes in to eat. The sun comes out with lots of heat. It dries the buckskin that was damp, and hauls the log right into camp. That was a pretty lucky crew, and yet we had some hard luck too. You've heard of Phelan double-jawed? He had 2 sets of teeth that sawed through almost anything. One night he sure did use his molars right. While walking in his sleep he hit the filer's rack, and after it then with the stone trough he collides, which makes him sore and mad besides. Before he wakes, so mad is he, and works those double teeth of his, and long before he gets his wits, he chews that grindstone into bits. But still we didn't miss it, so for to the top we used to go, and from the 40's highest crown we'd start the stones a-rolling down. We'd lay an axe on every one and follow it upon the run. And when we reached the lowest edge, each axe had a razor edge. So passed the winter day by day, not always work, not always play. We fought a little, worked a lot, and played whatever chance we got. Jim Liverpool, for instance, bet across the river he could get by jumping, and he won it too. He got the laugh on half the crew. For twice in the air he stops and humps, and makes the river in 3 jumps. We didn't have no booze around for every fellow that we found, and sent to town for Applejack, would drink it all up coming back. One day the bull cook paring spuds hears a sizzling in the suds. He finds the peelings, strange to say, are all fermenting where they lay. Now sour-faced Murphy in the door was standing, and the face he wore convinced the first assistant cook that Murphy soured 'em with his look. And when he had the paring drained, a quart of Irish booze remained. The bull cook tells the tale to Paul, and Paul takes Murphy off the hall, and gives him very willingly a job as camp distillery. At last, 100 million in, 'twas time for driving to begin. We broke our rollways in a rush, and started through the rain and slush, to drive the 100 million down, until we reached some sawmill town. We didn't know the river's name, nor where to someone's mill it came, but figured that, without a doubt, to some good town 'twould fetch us out, if we observed the usual plan, and drove the way the current ran. Well, after we had driven for at least 2 weeks, and maybe more, we come upon a pyramid. We come upon a pyramid that looked just like our 40 did. Some 2 weeks more, and then we passed a camp that looked just like the last. 2 weeks again, another 2, that looked like our camp come in view. Then Bunyan called us all ashore, and held a council like of war. He said with all this lumbering, our logs would never fetch a thing. The next day after Sliver Jim, he had the wit scared out of him. For a while he's breaking of a jam, he comes upon remains of Sam, the flunky who made the great ascent, and through the cookhouse ceiling went. And when Pink Eye grabbed the fatal tin, and put the blasting powder in. And then we realized at last that every camp that we had passed was ours. Yes, it was then we found the river we was on was round. And though we'd driven many a mile, we drove a circle all the while. And that's the truth as I'm alive, about the great round river drive. What's that? Did ever anyone come on that camp of 61 or 63 or 65, the year we drove round River Drive? Yes, Harry Gustin, Pete and me, T. Hanson and some 2 or 3 of good and truthful lumbermen came on that famous camp again, in west of Graylin 50 miles, where all the face of nature smiles. We found the place in 84, but it had changed some since the war. The fire had run some summer through, and spoiled the logs and timber too. The sun had dried the river clean, but still its bed was plainly seen. And so we knew it was the place, for of the past we found a trace. A peavy loggers know so well, a peavy with a circle L, which as you know was Bunyan's mark. The hour was late, 'twas getting dark. We had to move, but there's no doubt it was the camp I've told about. And eastward went, a corner found, and took another look around. Round River, so we learned that day, on section 37 lay.